In this video, I'm going to discuss what is left of the political left, specifically in the United States post the win of Donald J. Trump. We're going to open up with a reading from an article called "Is February 28th, 2017, the Night the Democratic Party Died?" I was once a Democrat. In those days, I thought I was on the team of truth, justice, and the American way. It was fun to be a Democrat then, but bye, bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. I woke up. I'm no longer a Democrat. It's been many years now, and though on the rarest of occasions I worried I'd made a mistake, Tuesday night while watching the shell-shocked faces of Democrats on the floor of Congress while Donald Trump delivered his magnificent speech, I knew I had made no error. I even wondered what was going on in my head in those isolated moments I doubted myself. I'm going to leave a link to this article. I think you should check it out. The speech he's talking about is the February 28th joint address to Congress that Donald Trump gave, which you might as well check out as well. They're both well worth it. In a related note, that song, American Pie by Don McLean, is one of the examples of American culture. I think it can probably be included in some maybe de facto test to see if you can be a citizen of the States. Like, just play some of the song, if you can sing along or name the song or name some lyrics, you could kind of get in. I think it's one of those artifacts that you think of when you hear the term Americana. Now, if you're one of those Democrats that are not willing to go down with the ship and find yourselves in an ocean of tears and snowmelt with a beaten-to-death concrete donkey tied to your neck, what is there to do? Many are trying to find out what's left for the quote-unquote classic liberals that many have recently been speaking of. The President Donald J. Trump's joint address to Congress may be for some the final involuntary spasms and twitches of a once proud, poignant party that suffered a slow death at the poison of progressive policies. Here's a quote from an article from the Hoover Institute that was shared with me a while ago, with the warning that the author can be obtuse and somewhat inaccessible, but I think it's well worth reading as well. To understand the challenge whole, it is first necessary to correct an unfortunate confusion of terms. In the United States, liberal commonly denotes the left wing of the Democratic Party. To be sure, as a result of bruising post-1960s political battles, many on the left have disavowed the term liberal, choosing instead the label progressive, in fact a more apt designation of their outlook. Nevertheless, the term liberal retains a distinctive meaning, indeed a progressive one, in our political lexicon. It was not foreordained that liberal would become synonymous with progressive politics as it has in the United States. Witness the career of the term in Europe, where it has come to designate something much closer to libertarianism, yet neither is the equation of liberalism with progressivism an accident, for there is a powerful progressive thrust inhering in the liberal tradition. So it's from The Liberal Spirit in America by Peter Berkowitz from Friday, August 1st in 2003. So what does the Democratic Party look like now? Several stories right after the win of President Trump said that the Democrats were likely to double down on their losing policies and practices. One article in particular pointed at a historical precedent for parties not learning from their losing ways. This sort of candidate was a combination of decades of ineptitude added to self-congratulatory awarding of positions based on increasingly out-of-touch and insubstantial goals and successes. I am by no means an expert, but gleaned this from a crash course in politics that I had experienced over the last few years. It is also by no means limited to the Democratic Party in the United States, but instead a characteristic of establishment politics, as we were constantly reminded by many on the left and the right that President Trump is not a real Republican. But that's for another time. It may look like it was close, this past election in the United States. It may look like it was theirs to lose, the Democrats making every mistake they possibly could. But no, they were soundly beaten by competence, a competence that they had long found not worth obtaining, and thus put themselves in an environment where they could not recognize that competence when it stood right across from them. The premonitions of the Democratic destruction were correct. Their behavior at the joint address to Congress is only another bullet point. Now, is this point on a chart of symptoms as doctors are performing the last frantic activity trying to save a patient rushed into the emergency room with several bullet wounds? Or is it something jotted down as a cadaver is methodically dissected on the autopsy table? What it looked like? Who saw this coming? The party and establishment have increasingly been about appearances rather than content. And this is actually another damning thing about how ineffective these policies are, that focusing on appearances still had so many of them blind to what was standing right in front of them. This was the established way of doing things. Who looks good? What seems possible or sounds good? Little effort to actually identify what is good. The run-up to the election had the Democrats claiming anyone who calls into question, even calling into question the results of the election, were un-American and anti-democratic. A litany of accusations came out about how riled up the losing supporters of President Trump would be. Many Democrats then went on to be these very characters they drew up. One person I imagined to be a character when I first heard of him was Representative Keith Ellison. I recall an article claiming he would be the next chair of the Democratic National Convention and signify the party pressing down on the gas and going off the progressively approaching cliff into obscurity. Ellison's history and policies have enabled people as unsavory as the infamous former KKK member David Duke, be he a troll or not, to endorse him. I expected that Ellison would just disavow this and did not expect the Democrats to engage in any guilt by endorsement witch hunt similar to the one they gleefully carried out when then candidate Trump received an endorsement by Duke. I had not been keeping up with the internal Democratic policies when I heard that Tom Perez won the chairmanship and then proceeded to promote Ellison to the deputy chairperson of the Democratic National Convention. So, it seems that we have an establishment vehicle, with Tom Perez being a former labor secretary under Obama and close to the Clintons, fueled by high-octane progressive policies, with Ellison being a favorite of Senator Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who were pushing the party to the quote-unquote radical left. So, apparently, no sign of changing any direction. Here we hurtled towards a cliff. This was a sign of the end for many people. So, the zombie-crats. There's an oft-mentioned but infrequently used citations claim that the Democratic and Republican Party somehow switched policies sometime after the Democrats established the KKK and other regressive practices. As was mentioned in the article The Liberal Spirit in America, there was certain changes where the left kind of switched different terms and definitions. The so-called Dixiecrats turned their coats. The increased calls for segregation from the liberal left had me thinking that they may have progressed so far in this race of race relations that they were back at the starting line. I wrongly used to propose to people or ask some friends if they thought that these liberals or progressives may be the actual true conservatives because they were so into not wanting things to change, kind of progressing things, taking things back to the past. But I was wrong with that, since the conservative is more accurately defined by how much government one wants. And one thing about the left, liberals, progressives, or however you'd want to define them, they definitely are about big government. So I can see reasons why a party in disfavor would want to take on the mantle of not being racist. But why would the other side acquiesce to this? Why would the people who were formerly non-racist Republicans choose to go to a party that had a history of being racist Democrats? So in the past, if this was the myth of the Dixiecrats, I think what we're seeing today may be the dawn of the Zombiecrats. There are a few people still claiming that the party can be salvaged, that new blood will come in. A lot of people pointing at the fact that many young people are activated by people like Bernie Sanders and interested in the party, but when it comes down to it, their policies are lacking. And this may be more evidence of appearances over actual content, because just having many recent college graduates supporting you is not necessarily a positive thing. When it comes to this situation in this political reality, they're also voting in more of an unnatural environment, coming from an extended childhood and arrested development where their realities don't really match the realities of the world. There's probably going to be an economic collapse coming soon. Okay, collapse may be a tough word here. It may envision something like the 1920s with people on the streets, but when it comes down to it, the policies economically are not realistic. There's a large amount of student debt. People are still living at home. It's just a general arrested development situation where people aren't plugged into the actual market. They're not plugged into the understanding of what high taxes do. They don't have jobs. They don't have an accurate sign of the future. They're kind of addicted to government largesse. An ever-increasing and disturbingly increasing percentage of people are spending a lot of time saying the government should do this and the government should do that. It is likely not a coincidence that the amount of knowledge in how government does things has also reduced over this time. too many focus on the so-called free things that government can provide, while completely oblivious to the concept of opportunity cost. What do you lose when you count on the government to do X thing for you? In many cases, you lose personal responsibility and the ability that comes with agency. I'm going to call that a rant here. Thanks for listening. I will continue this in a separate post that goes more into opportunity costs, give a simple example, and then a few examples of how I've seen it in the world. And like and subscribe if you liked what you heard here. Share if you want. Links in the low bar one more time. Thanks and goodbye.